Thank you, Minister Giannini, for your beautiful, beautiful presentation. In the Prado, there is a magical painting by Goya. Kronos eats its children. Time is the tyrant. So I'm sorry you didn't have more time. We could have heard you so much longer. Thank you for your presentation. A quick reflection, and then we will open it up for a series of questions. Then Jeff and I will make a comment about some next steps. I was, first, as the Holy Father said to us today, beauty in the Platonic tradition, of course, is so much at the center of all teaching and all learning. And the Holy Father ended with a remark that wasn't in the text, that was so important. He said, a good education will create poets. So I would also add two other ideas, the idea of beauty, but also the idea of the ludic, the playful qualities that are so central to all meaningful teaching and learning. We have forgotten the playful, that which is joyful in learning, in discovery, and in engagement. So this is also a point of entry to the idea of the arts as central to our endeavors moving forward. So now we open it up for questions, and my boss is Professor Samagni, so I have to do what he tells me.
No, thank you very much. I will specifically refer to Stefania's presentation to underline some points which, in my opinion, deserves great attention. First of all, the distinction between development and growth. You know, development in the Italian language is sviluppo. And those who know Italian know that in Latin language, an S in front of a word means negation. So sviluppo, hence development, means to free oneself from viluppi. Viluppi are the bonds, the chains. Why is this important? Because the notion of development is strictly linked to the notion of freedom. On the other hand, growth is not typical of human beings. Even animals grow, even plants grow, but you would never say a dog has developed. It's ridiculous. Only human being can develop, because to develop means to free, to become more free. And that means that in the notion of development, of course, the growth dimension is a relevant one, but it's only one. There are the other two dimensions, which are the social, relational dimension and the spiritual dimension. So a project of development is sustainable and solid if it is capable of maintaining the three dimensions in harmony. The key, harmony is a Greek word, and it's important Greek word. In other words, harmony means that the three dimensions, we should avoid that one dimension crowds out the other one. And that what is occurring in our countries, more or less, even though in different proportions. The second is, correctly, it has been said by many here, that education is human rights. But that is not enough. We should know that two are the types of human rights, positive and negative. Now, what is the difference? That to respect a negative human rights, what is necessary and sufficient is simply to not interfere with somebody else's sphere of freedom. For instance, if I have the rights of speech, that the right is satisfied if nobody, no authority can tell to me, don't speak. But Positive human rights are those whose implementation presupposes a redistribution of resources. Education is a positive human right. So I am sometimes crossed when people keep on talking blah, blah, blah about human rights. Unless you state that is a positive human right, it makes no sense. Because if you state that the human rights is positive, then the implication is that some authority has to redistribute income or resources in order to satisfy the human rights. That is the fundamental difference between positive and human. Finally, the third one has to, I was impressed by what Stefania said, that about the notion of responsibility. As you know, responsibility has two meanings, not one. One is the common one, is responsibility as accountability, which is relevant, but is not the most relevant today. Responsibility as accountability means that I am responsible for what I do, for the consequences of my action, and that is okay. But today, the more important notion of responsibility is the other one, namely responsibility as taking care. In other words, I am responsible not only for the bad things that I do, but for the good things that I do not do, even though I am in a position of doing. If you want, try to read a fascinating book by Gilbert Chesterton, written in the 30s, just a famous English writer. And he has a figure that Basil Grant was a judge in Great Britain. One day he was disposed. He was sent to home. Why? Because Basil Grant, instead of judging those who committed minor crimes, judged and gave years of prison to those, it is written in the book, who behave selfishly, opportunistically, and without any taking care of the other. And so that is why he was dispelled. But Chesterton writes, a day will come, that book is the 30s, last century, when people, humankind, will discover that the most important notion of responsibility is the second one, not the first one, taking care. The point is that unless we take care, it is obvious that an issue such as that of education will not be resolved. So I was pleased that you referred exactly to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Stefano, I'd like to give the floor to our colleague, Nick De Fruscia, who will now share his message, and then Leslie and Vittorio.
Great, thank you everybody. It's been a pleasure to sit here and listen to all of you make such great presentations. Excuse me. I'm a senior advisor to the Blue Chip Foundation, and I'm honored to be here with you guys today to speak on behalf of Blue Chip's founders, Jen Gross and Peter Stengard. Jen wishes she could be here with you today, but unfortunately she's unable to, and she looks forward to joining you in May for your next event. Universal education is an essential pillar of SDG achievement, without which the achievement of all other goals are in jeopardy. As governments and multilateral institutions grapple with the question of how to raise the funding necessary to meet their education commitments, the philanthropic community is asking itself a similar question. How can private philanthropy catalyze and augment the global efforts necessary to mobilize large-scale, higher quality resources to meet the world's education needs? SDSN released a report this past September, and echoed by Jeff, that estimated that it would cost a total annual average of $358 billion to achieve all education-related SDG targets in the world's poorest countries through 2030. The funding gap that exists between the resources already available in these countries and the resources still needed to meet their education costs varies by country, but it's safe to say that it's economically untenable to expect any low-income country to fill this gap on its own without jeopardizing its overall SDG progress, which means that the international community must step up to provide them with the aid that they need to get the job done. So what does stepping up look like? We know that since 2000, education aid has increased dramatically, but it has stagnated over the course of most of the recent decade. When we examine the education aid that is given, it's evident that much of the aid is given bilaterally rather than through coordinated multilateral channels, and that bilateral donors have very different priorities from each other, and often from recipient governments for their education spending. The philanthropic sector is a particularly bad actor in this way. Additionally, the highest share of education aid is still not directed to low-income countries. Data from this past year reveals that Armenia, an upper middle-income country, and Georgia, a lower middle-income country, rank as the top 1 and 2 recipients of global education aid. Education aid is also highly fragmented. For 7 recipient countries, all of which are in sub-Saharan Africa, no one donor gives more than 25% of each country's education aid. This can quickly become a logistical nightmare for recipient countries and has implications for the efficacy of aid spending. To address this, there have been a recent push to establish donor collectives like Co-Impact, established by the Rockefeller and Gates Foundations, to aggregate individual donor funds and channel them towards specific issues for maximum impact. These are useful in areas where there are no currently official funds established, but their capabilities, or their capacities are still limited by their smaller scale. The conclusion the Blue Chip Foundation supports is that the international community must establish a global education fund that streamlines multiple donors, aligns donor strategies with recipient country demands, and targets low-income countries. There are also a myriad of conversations about starting such a fund and to design it to mimic the successes of the Global Fund as well as others like the Green Climate Fund and the similar. There's also been progress on some regionally specific education funds like the African Union's Secondary Education Fund, about which we anticipate there will be some great, exciting updates by your next meeting in May, thanks in part to the work of the SDG Center for Africa and its director, Bilal Begashaw. There's a strong precedent for private philanthropy for playing a catalytic role in calling for the establishment of such a fund and backing up its calls with notable seed funding. As of July 2019, private sector and non-government partners have contributed nearly $3 billion to the Global Fund. Blue Chip is ready to utilize its platform to assist in coordinating private donors and businesses to help galvanize the philanthropic community to seed an education fund. We look to others in this room to help galvanize the necessary institutional actors to move this idea forward as well. Thank you for all of your work, your passion, and your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nick. We'll take you up on your offer. Leslie, Vittorio, Jeff? Please, Leslie.
I feel confident in speaking on behalf of this entire task force here in firstly thanking all of the participants for the most inspiring and amazing presentations. And this has kind of been topped, Stefania, by you. And I have to say, on all our behalves, we are now hugely optimistic because we have you at the helm. And I wish you'd been here yesterday as well, because you will have seen that, you know, from the fantastic presentations you heard today, there was a plethora of them yesterday. You summarized neatly everything we've all said, right? So that is just fantastic. We're all on the same page. I would just like to make 2 very brief further observations. You spoke about the interdisciplinarity of learning, and I want to just remind us that the effects of learning, the kind of learning we're talking about, which is a new reimagined learning, and not the broken system that exists up hitherto, but the kind of learning we are talking about will lead to extraordinary benefits in many disciplines and many fields. And this ties in with one of the last points you made, which was that policy has to become, you know, has to follow this, and we need to entrench this in policy. And in a way, the point I'm making is that the two go hand in glove, because this education brings benefits to health, to the economy, to mental health, to violence, to to justice, the justice system, all across society, which is again a reflection of the point you made, that it is about social being and social learning that we're really talking in the new kind of learning. So we should therefore find it easier as well to persuade governments, because apart from anything else, their GDP is going to skyrocket when this money used for incarceration of offenders of violence, for example, to name just one, or suicides, or loss of hours of work, and God knows what they cynically compute, will all fly up. So I'm hugely optimistic. And last thing, all of these points are so, wonderful and inspiring, but unless they are turned into action fast, we will not make 2030. We will never have another opportunity, because nobody will believe us. It'll be crying wolf. We've missed the first Millennium Goal deadline. People are looking around cynically and not in this room, but elsewhere, saying we're never going to make it by 2030. Yes, of course we will. Yes, of course we can. We've got 9 whole years. But we need to start now. Action, even for action's sake. But we need to do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Vittorio, Jeff, Sebastian.
Well, I wanted also to thank you for the splendid presentations that we heard this afternoon. I want to make 2 remarks. The one is, you are completely right, purpose is not necessarily moral. After all, Jack the Ripper or Adolf Hitler had a very strong purpose in their life, and they were quite successful at that. But it seems to be a necessary condition for a moral life. Why? Well, I think it has to do with the fact that our mental life has certain features that are active. We decide now to focus on the problem of education of a future, and sometimes we are simply driven. Certain thoughts appeal in us, and it's very strange how our mental life can have this active and passive moment, and it's a very normal human desire to be in control of your own mental life. And having a purpose allows you to structure your mental life, and it guarantees continuity. You can have a purpose over many, many, many years, and a great mind is a person who does a lot of different things, but we're all part of an overarching plan of life, and it makes your behavior predictable to other people. Therefore, it is indeed crucial that we teach people to have a purpose, even if you are completely right, it should be also a moral purpose. And now I come to the second remark addressed to Stefania, who is very much committed to the moral purpose of education. When we speak about ethics of education, the term has 2 very different meanings. On the one hand, what are the moral principles that inspire education? Either the idea that we should offer education, and then the concrete tasks of the educator, but of course there is also the issue that ethics should be an important content of education. If our concept of education must be sustainable, it's not sufficient that we who plan that are inspired by moral values, but we must instill the moral values that guarantee the sustainability of that. So moral education must be a crucial part of any intelligent philosophy of education. Second point, interdisciplinarity. I mean, that is a very important issue. I personally think that we need even more than interdisciplinarity. Obviously, the predicament in which late modernity finds itself, and it's lethal, has to do with the fact that we do not know where what we know belongs. And this presupposes some form of system of knowledge that allows us to put things into the context. And this has, to a large amount, collapsed under the pressure of more and more specialization, also in my own discipline, philosophy. And last point, we have heard about all the digital opportunities. Great, but what is the main problem of all these opportunities? It's that we are drowning in information. And the enormous increase of information can only be mastered in an intellectually and morally responsible way if we develop strategies of selecting information. And this presupposes a clear rank order of criteria. Some informations are more relevant than others. This presupposes that we should not give up in our quest for universal education the belief that there is a rank order of quality. When we were in the Vatican this morning, we were all quite impressed by the art. And this was not a democratic society, but it was a society that was inspired by a very, very high value of, a high respect for the great values of the human mind. And if I may end with a personal note, one of the reasons why I'm a proud Catholic is that the combination of a commitment to a universal idea of justice while maintaining the idea of an hierarchy of values is what makes Catholicism, for me, the perfect religious home. Thank you.
Thank you, Vittorio, for your thank you, Vittorio, for your reflections. Jeff and Sebastian.
We've been inspired several times in the last 2 days. And Stefania, you inspired us again, which is not so simple following the Pope. But I want to say a word about UNESCO and how important it is for what we're doing. UNESCO is our global organization, but also our global commitment to education, science, and culture. And it's vital. It's a vital institution for that. And it's thrilling that it has incredibly insightful and dynamic leadership, you and Audrey Azoulay, the Director General. And part of what we should be doing is supporting UNESCO to help lead, because you are the focal point in the world for education. You are the holder of SDG 4. We all believe, I think, in this room, and as someone responsible in some measure for promoting all 17 SDGs, I believe SDG 4 is the most important of all the SDGs. I never said that when we had the Millennium Development Goals. They were all important, and I always explain why they're all important. But if we don't educate now, we're not going to make it on anything else. All the others are important, but for me, the gap between where we are and where we need to be on education is as grave as the gap on climate change or others. And part of our crisis of climate change and other areas is the education shortfall. We also have the wonderful instigation of SDG 4.7, which is precisely to teach decency and values, tolerance, diversity, importance of culture, as well as the science of sustainable development. So it's a very, and the science of climate change, environment, and so forth. So it's a remarkable target. When the MDGs were launched in 2000, immediately afterwards, several very positive developments occurred. The most important of which was the launch of the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. And that was launched by Kofi Annan in March 2001 in Abuja. And within a couple of months of Kofi's call for a global fund, he stood in the Rose Garden with George W. Bush, who became the first government leader to support that. Bill Gates joined in immediately with, I think it was a $750 million grant to the Global Fund right away. Since the Sustainable Development Goals have been announced, there hasn't been one notable, specific breakthrough. I have been special advisor to all 3 Secretaries General during this period, and for me it's a very palpable difference. Of course, it's a much more difficult time right now, but we don't have one single initiative that is because of this. We have many good things going on. The Sustainable Development Goals are surprisingly legitimated and global right now. We were in the Islamic Development Bank about 4 days ago, Sonia and I, and they represent 57 countries in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. The whole day was SDGs. And I just got a note by coincidence from the head of the Islamic Solidarity Fund for Development, thanking me for the visit and expressing their intention to mobilize support for a global education coalition initiative to put 28 million out-of-school children back into school. We have a universal agenda, and this is quite wonderful. I mentioned, of course, May 14th to the president of the Islamic Development Bank, and I think that there's a tremendous global receptivity. What we just heard now from Blue Chip and from Leslie I think also expresses how we all feel. We want to back you. We really want to back Pope Francis. We want to get something real accomplished, big, timely, to make this the opportunity that it is. I recounted a couple of days ago how the top 50 richest people in the world now have $2 trillion in their bank balances, $2 trillion. That's 50 people. The top 15 Americans, well over $1 trillion. Jeff Bezos this morning, $2 billion more than it was yesterday. He had a $6 billion increase a week ago on one day that Amazon stock increased. Now it's $126 billion. My training is basically decimal points. I can tell you that's a good chunk of money, and we shouldn't settle for a few $1 million here and there. We should really mobilize to get the job done. What's really thrilling for me is to put together the need and the SDGs as they were with the innovation that we're hearing, the vision. Because what you expressed, what our scholars expressed here, what Pope Francis expressed is an extraordinarily powerful vision of a new kind of education. Education in the community, education that is lifelong. The schools play a role, but it's a far more dynamic process. Education for problem solving, education for engagement. What Pope Francis means by the Pact for Education or the Compact is literally the families, the community, the teachers, and so forth. I also am looking for the money and the philanthropists and the government development aid because I know that with all the wonderful things here, in the circumstances where I'm working day to day or trying to help, and today he was, the head of this Islamic fund is saying, please help me in Chad, Mali, Niger. So he was asking for help to raise a couple $100 million specifically for those three countries. Nothing's going to happen unless we combine this powerful vision with the actual means to do it. And the Global Fund came about. I helped to promote it and to design it, actually, and to develop the concept, because in 1996, the antiretroviral cocktails were developed. And David and I worked a lot on this. David was an early leader in HIV treatment. I think probably David alerted me to this issue probably before anybody. And we worked together at Harvard on this. It was that there was something new to do, very important. Of course, even if we didn't have something new to do in schools, the mere fact of 260 million kids out of school would be something to do. But the message that you have is incredibly resonant and incredibly powerful. And it is the same message as the Pope's message, and it's the same message as we have been discussing for the last 2 days here. There's a new kind of education at work also. A philanthropist can't say, nah, I'm not interested. It's teachers' unions. They're going to block this. It's something far more interesting, far more important, far more exciting. It's really about education for our survival, for our well-being, for living together. So I think what is on offer also is thrilling. And that is what makes this also feasible to do. So what I hope we have is a mandate to work for you and for Pope Francis and to mobilize quickly resources. I knock on doors of billionaires for a living, and I've been speaking with a lot of them recently. They're ready, but they don't know how and what. Jack Ma, Mukesh Ambani, Bill Gates will come, others will come. But we now, I think, as epistemic leaders and as adherents to both UNESCO and multilateralism and to Pope Francis and his unique moral leadership, I think we should step forward and say, here, it's time, it's urgent, let's do something now, real. Not ask for too much permission, but I want your permission and the Pope's permission to mobilize. And I think that what we've heard in the last 2 days has been incredibly inspiring and incredibly important. So thank you.
It's not easy to follow after this speech, but okay, I want to propose to you, Stefania, something to mobilize us as scientists. You know, I am putting in the last slides of my presentation during the last 2 decades the need of interdisciplinary efforts. So something is wrong because we are saying that all the time, and I wonder if UNESCO could have a sort of role for mobilizing, to mobilize the dynamics in which we are based, in which we are organized, the ways of assigning grants for scientific efforts, for interdisciplinary efforts, basically. Do you understand what I mean? So because in our countries, and especially in the South, it's very difficult because the system is organized in clusters, very close clusters, very unflexible ones. So it's very difficult to overcome that. So maybe UNESCO as an international organization could help us. Of course, I am not a policymaker, but I think that sometimes innovating in new ways of granting specific lines of interdisciplinary, just thinking in specific problems. So I believe in the co-design and the co-implementation and the co-evaluation between policymakers, teachers, families, scientists. So, but we need the support because our countries are old. They are repeating old strategies that don't allow us to advance, to mobilize this problem. You understand? Okay.
Well, I agree. I have the highly questionable honor of following both the Holy Father and Jeff Sachs. But I did want to say, so much in my mind of what we've been talking about these past 2 days comes down to access. 260 million school-aged children without access, as Professor Sachs says. The role of poverty, and the importance of approaching structural challenges with a local perspective. Funding, governance, infrastructure, curriculums, teacher training, instructional quality, and so on. The Sustainable Development Goal timeline is, I think, a singular opportunity to catalyze progress on all these fronts. It represents, among other things, a pressure that in combination with a greater consciousness and a capability and understanding to achieve a completely new level of progress and success. A principal challenge in my mind is reaching a different kind of integration across disciplines and the success we can achieve in doing so, and then the ability to translate that into solutions that can address each of the factors we've discussed. I believe tremendous hope comes from these factors: the brilliant work and words from our speakers these past 2 days, and the wonderful vision and intent focus of the Holy Father. And I feel it's an important place for us to leave this workshop. I would ask the group, if I could, to spend a moment to exchange thoughts on where our hope comes from. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Carlina, did you have? No. Thank you. Carlina Rinaldi.
Not only for expressing all my gratitude for any moment we have been sharing together, any moment, not only formal moment, but any moment, but also because among the many reasons why I'm feeling so grateful, so emotional, there are two words that I bring home: renewed and regenerated. One is one of the oldest one, that is education. But it has been regenerated by this encounter, has been exploded by this encounter, and regenerate words and words. Can we continue to talk about teacher training in the same way? Can we continue to think about what we have been done since now? Relationship between teacher and children in the same way? A lot of questions. I go back with a lot of new generative questions. That is why my full gratitude. The second one that is connected to this one, among the many reasons why I have to thank Professor Giannini, is unpack, taking care. Has been always fighting with the word education, has been always limited. Caregiver, different salary, different role, different. Taking care, full of reciprocity, interdependency, is something regenerated by your word in that speech, obviously, that I'm very grateful to. But these two words that are two words are something that I will never have enough energy to thank all of you for regenerating a new meaning, not only for these words, but for my life at my age. Could be wonderful, very healthy. Thank you very much.
La jueza Lobrano, por favor. Judge Lobrano, please.
I'd like to thank everyone because I am the only judge in the room, and it has been quite fascinating, amazing, and a lot to take in. I'd like to thank Bishop Sanchez-Serrata for having me. I was at the two judges' summits last year. We talk a little differently, but we talk about the same issues. Because in a courtroom, we see when circumstances in life have failed. People come to our courtroom when a child has fallen through that safety net that all of us here want to put up for them and their families. And when I was a prosecutor before, I was a district court judge where I handled general jurisdiction, so I was juvenile court, family court, divorces, I saw everything. I realized that I want to be a great prosecutor, and I want to be a great judge. But I had to have a great community-based service. As a prosecutor and judge, I was as good as what I had in my community to help that 15-year-old boy who was smoking marijuana, which is illegal in Louisiana, but it was the only thing that made him feel good. And I had to put him into health care. I had to put an expert. I utilized this evidence-based intervention that you all talk about, that we have to bring into the communities. And as judges, especially juvenile court judges, we have some authority. We are the enforcer of truancy, of compulsory education. But not only that, we are required to supervise our community to make sure they have proper services for our children. Because before proper services, all these wonderful evidence-based interventions that you were talking about, the curriculums, are for naught if we do not have a healthy child, a healthy family, and a healthy community. So in 2004, I started establishing a community care model. And it brings in, I call it care to the cube, because it's a three-dimensional protection that brings the schools, the courts, and healthcare. Because remember, I'm as good as the schools and the teachers and the healthcare. And it established a trust-based relationship with the schools and judges and prosecutors, which is very difficult because a lot of teachers and schools do not understand judges, because sometimes judges did not, we have a high incarceration rate at times, and they did not understand trauma. We're learning now. But I realized from early on, because my life was always within the school system. My parents were school teachers, and they were the best. They knew how to look at the most vulnerable population in the school and take care of them. So I was always in the schools, and my teachers were my second family. So when I went to Tulane University, they encourage multidisciplinary degrees, and I studied politics and education, political science and education, and the politics of public school education. So I've always had my life into the school system, and that's why these 2 days have been just fascinating for me. I think of my parents back in the 60s and 70s, working in the South through integration and segregation, and the hurdles they had, that they overcame. Not all, but they have, and we are overcoming obstacles, and that's what judges look for, because when we see someone in our courtroom, there is some barrier that got this child here, this family, and a lot of it was a lack of quality education or lack of proper health care treatment for a child who has had a lot of trauma. So the basis of my community motto is community care centers, and they're based on a multidisciplinary, one-stop shop, holistic approach. I call it my syringe for my community, but I don't have liquid medicine. I have all the evidence-based services that filter through this 501c3 that is non-political, because it works with all the politicians, and 10 schools just get these services. 3 years ago, we had a cluster of suicides in our small community. It devastated us. The community center went and found the evidence-based suicide prevention and put it into all 10 schools immediately because of this multi-agency center that was delivering these services. 3 years. We've been suicide-free, so, but what I'm trying to explain is, all you were talking about, the glue, how multidisciplinary. We have to work together. The court system, the education system, healthcare has to work together. You're seeing, medical clinics in schools in inner city. You're seeing all this happening. But from a very early intervention, juvenile court judges are responsible for compulsory attendance at schools. And it is, in many laws, an obligation of the child and obligation of the family to make sure a child gets a proper education. Being undocumented, being where they are, if they're in your community, they are responsible for getting education and the services there. So I just thank everybody. This is my 15-year project of watching to bring together different disciplines and the building of community. And when the center responds to change, and in my parish, I have a little parish, we're the mouth of the Mississippi River, but we had 2 devastating hurricanes, Hurricane Katrina and Isaac, that wiped out my community except for one small city. We also had the British Petroleum oil spill. We're on the mouth of the Mississippi River where we're losing a lot of wetlands. So we have climate change issue. An industry is going out of business. But with all these different things, we've had a center sending out services for all these very extreme type of disasters. And it is a model that I'm very proud of. If anybody's in New Orleans, please come visit. So thank you again. It's fascinating. I love teachers, I love schools, and now I love these educational scholars. You guys are absolutely fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Loverano. New Orleans is in wise hands. Professor Pierre Léna.
This is a brief comment for Stefania Giannini. In the last 2 decades, maybe, we have observed that there is a too slow, but real tendency of the scientific community, so busy with research and discoveries and new fields, to pay more attention to education, especially to primary education. This trend has produced results, but it's far from being sufficient, especially in developing countries. UNESCO is an ideal place to develop all what we have said here, and you are in the position to help more than probably anyone else but the Pope. I would like to plead for more and more contact and cooperation between science and education within UNESCO. In the past, we have had some deceptive experience on that. You probably know about them, and some efforts were attempted. I think there is a long way to go. As you know, I have personally witnessed the convergence on climate issues between the two departments and Ocean. And again, there is a long, long way to go. This is so essential. This is something we try here in the academies, to have the science and social science working together as much as we can. And so I take the liberty to express this hope for the future of your grand plan on education for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Léna. If no one else would like to have the floor, I have 2 housekeeping matters and then a final reflection. It would be very important if you would like to have included in our summary, if you would send to me 3 to 5 sentences of the issues that are most salient and that are most important, that are most relevant to each of your presentations. The sooner you can send me that, the better. I would also ask your permission to access your PowerPoint. That would be very helpful to us in preparing our summaries. If you have an objection, please let me know now. Otherwise, I will ask our colleagues to print them or to give us access to them. We would like to produce a volume based on the extraordinary ideas, the extraordinary contributions that you have made over the last 2 days. Jeff and I have an idea to take the volume, perhaps to Columbia University Press, to have a speedy program for bringing the written versions of the chapters into print, so that as we begin the more public phase of the Global Compact on Education, scholars and policymakers and parents and community leaders could have access to our materials. So, Jeff, I would turn it over to you. So what I would plead is to kindly have your next version of your papers to me and to Jeff within the next 2 months. It took Goethe 30 years to complete the Faust. We don't have 30 years. What I've learned from Ram is that when he began, Ram is my teacher on the existential crisis of our times and check climate change. And Ram told me, when I started doing this research, it was my grandchildren's problem. Then it became very clearly, it was, Ram, when you started the research, the problem was going to be your grandchildren's problem. Or even great-grandchildren. Then it became your children's problem. That was my problem. Now it's your problem. We do not have 30 years like Faust had to write, like Goethe had to write the Faust. So please, in 2 months, Dickens wrote weekly, on a weekly basis. He had to turn in what became now this beautiful literature. So please, I would like to ask you to be generous, to be kind, to be disciplined, and to send me the next version of the papers so that Jeff and I can begin sooner rather than later the work of preparing a volume that would help our colleagues to share with the extraordinary work we presented over the last 2 days. Jeff.
Well, just to confirm, I think the papers are in great shape, so there's not a great deal of work that needs to be done. And what I would like to do is take the papers as they are and to go to the editor-in-chief of Columbia University Press to discuss quickly, I hope, what will be their interest in publishing it, and then there will be time for revision. 2 months? Wow, that's very generous of you. But in any event,
the difference between the Anglo-Saxon world,
right.
Jeff, and the Latin world.
But in any event, I think we'll send a package of them today, maybe in an hour or so. It's still morning in America, so we will try to get it approved in concept, and then you'll have a little bit of time to make revisions.
We're not going to get into a nickel and dime. We're not in the souk here. We're going to have the.
I think 2 months would be awfully risky, actually. I hope we'd include your paper. So, but your paper is perfect, so I don't see a problem.
Dear colleagues, I want to thank you. I want to thank first, of course, the Holy Father, whose wisdom, whose beauty, whose generosity has inspired us to come together in this gathering, to work for him and with him on this urgent matter of education for a deeply, deeply changed world. Our world is ever more miniaturized, it's ever more fragile, it's ever more interconnected. The formative moment that gave birth to the idea of a basic, public, free, and open education system is no longer with us. We are in another world. We are in a world where new technologies, new economies, new demographies, new inequalities define the problematique of education now and moving forward. I want to thank my tocayo, Monsignor Marcelo, for nudging us to come together in finding what Professor Damon and Professor Colby will call common purpose in our endeavor now and moving forward. I would also like to thank Professor Stefano Samagni, who is not only brilliant, but has what in New England we call a wicked sense of humor. Stefano, thank you. Thank you for your example. Thank you for your guidance. Thank you for inspiring us to come together. Of course, Jeff is a force of nature. I think as an Italian scholar, I think it was Voltaire, he said if we did not have Jeff, we would need to invent him because he's such a force of nature in these dark, dark times. So thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Of course, we gather in this beautiful, majestic setting, and I am so, so grateful to the entire team that makes our work so easy. There are so many delicate touches, so much diplomacy, so much love, where we can see, as the Holy Father said this morning, the brain, the heart, and the hand working together towards our common purpose. So thank you to our colleagues of the Pontifical Academies for all the work that is so essential for us to come together and to be able to do our work at this time, in this moment, and in this place. Thank you. Finally, I want to thank all of you, my dear friends and dear colleagues, some of you now former friends, from my comments. And as Monsignor says, my compañera of 45 years, Carola, who has taught me everything I know about refugee and immigrant children. Thank you. Muchas, muchas gracias.
Does Marcelo want to say anything?
Only thanks. I can say nothing. They say all the things that we need to say. So I am very happy for this common conclusion. Thank you. And I am very happy to the idea to have this publication. And I know that it's not easy to convert the PowerPoint in a text, but please convert the PowerPoint in a text because this is very important for the publication. Thank you very much.